Hello and welcome back to another Archaeo-Scope. Now this series is kind of like an inverted Questions of Doom, where rather than you sending me a question to try and answer, I put a question out there in the form of a video to hear your thoughts on it, and hopefully together in the discussion below we come up with an answer which one of us on our own might not have achieved. And I have to say, this particular topic is one where I'm certainly desperate for some input, because I keep on hitting a bit of a dead end. Now, first of all, I'll have to apologise for my slightly more dishevelled than usual appearance. Mrs. Soup and I have driven over 400 miles in 48 hours in the run-up to my brother's wedding. It's a long story, but basically we're tired. And also today I've got the dentist, so when this is uploading I'm going to be in a dentist's chair. I hate the dentist, so think of me then. And then I've got a meeting at Newcastle University, so hopefully I can make this look a little less, by then. Anyway, you're not here to hear about my dishevelledness. You want to know about this video, and the topic of this video actually came up while we were driving, or rather, so while I was driving, somewhere in Cumbria, the land of the cucumbers. We're in Cumbria, driving along, and this sort of popped into my head, and it wouldn't quite go away, and that is the fact, also the question of retro and kitsch. Now, we all know that sort of, oh, that's so retro, darling, I simply have to have it in my life. I need that Bakelite phone, it doesn't work anymore, it's completely outdated, but I need it in my living room, darling. Oh yes, so lovely. And also things like kitsch, stuff which is actually quite naff, but we have it around because it appeals to a sense of irony, a sense of fun, a sense of looking back on the past, usually the past few decades, past century maybe, with a certain amount of nostalgia and wanting a little piece of that in our lives, in our house where we live usually. This sense of retro, I was thinking, oh yes, very interesting, drive along. And then it occurred to me, is this actually a fairly modern luxury? Is it something which has really only come about since the 19th century? That's really when these concepts really take off. And I was trying desperately to think of, I suppose, ancient examples of, I suppose, first of all, rapid change, which would enable people from one decade to another to have a sense of retro, but then also actually deliberately holding on to that which is retro because it's retro, not because it's got a certain sentimentality or an heirloom or this kind of thing. Now, one of the examples that came to mind in terms of rapid change actually was the fact that Julius Caesar, for example, Sulla famously said, "Beware that badly belted boy," apparently, because Julius Caesar would wander around as a teenager, as a young man in Rome, with his belt outside his tunic, a big thick belt apparently, slung low on his hips like a cowboy. He'd be swaggering along. He was kind of like a Roman punk, you know, like the Roman equivalent of being punk. And this was a bit of offensive to people like Sulla, the dictator, and that's encouraging. That's a good start, because it actually tells us that people had the capacity to have this sense of generational change, generational offence, and therefore possibly generational nostalgia, looking back to fashions which came before. Now, I've already mentioned, I think, in the previous video, an instance where in the Roman world again, say a piece of Samian ware pottery has been stapled together. It's been smashed on the floor, they've taken it to a blacksmith to fix it, and while it will never be usable again as a bowl, it's still an object, it's been kept. And this is probably, though, because of nostalgia. It's been stapled together, all these bits are no longer usable, but it has a certain sentimentality possibly for the owner, so they've kept it. There's no, I don't think there's any real strong evidence of that being an element of people, someone wanting something retro in their lives, because it's also fundamentally broken. I think usually retro has something, has a completeness to it. It's not just collecting, otherwise archaeologists would be retroologists, wouldn't we? We would just be gathering things which are sort of, you know, broken and cute and old, whereas actually the gathering of retro stuff actually tends to be stuff which still works or which is still complete. So I don't think that one actually counts either. We know that, for example, in Pompeii, with the increasing, say, seismic activity around the impending eruption of a volcano, we know that plaster work and buildings were being damaged and being repaired. Sumps, for example, were being repaired, and you know, the city's infrastructure and decoration in houses. I think in the house of the chaste lovers, we know that wall was replastered after a crack, and then I think it cracked again. But it's really hard actually to see. Yes, okay, that's the upkeep of something despite it being destroyed. But it's really hard actually to see that people are holding on to, again, this sort of maybe 10, 20, 30-year-old fashion. That's more about oh no, it's fallen down again, better fix it. So it's really hard to see this stuff. And this is the reason why, as I was driving along, I was just really racking my brains. You might say on a cultural level, I don't know, Byzantium, or I suppose Istanbul, and you know, Constantinople, this sort of idea of continuity of certain cultural elements. You might say on that level that the fact that the Roman, Greek culture with an Arabic influence flowed into Europe, into, for example, Russia with the Tsars and this kind of thing, you might say that stuff has preserved a retrospective element of culture. But again, that's not the same as this idea of, oh, retro, darling, oh yes, oh, I love it, simply look how retro it is. That's just not what we're talking about. In that instance, that's really people appealing to the power of the past to legitimise the power of the present. You know, we do it in Britain all the time. Public buildings, for example, often refer either to the medieval era or to the Roman era to reinforce a sense of power. The Capitol building, say, for example, in Washington, very Romano-Greek, but not retro. It's appealing to something. So again, this idea is really hard actually to tie down in the past. The Saxons collected Roman glass beads. Is that retro? I don't think so, no. I think it's more a fascination with the artifact. Glass blowing, glassware became extremely rare in post-Roman Europe, and as those skills were being rediscovered in places like Jarrow, just down the road from me, we know that people were gathering these beads together, often to be buried with. They just loved them. It wasn't necessarily that. Because I think retro also comes with a certain sense of sentiment, not sentimentality, a certain sense of I suppose remembering something about the past, having a sort of sense of it being special or being cute or being something that your grandparents were involved with. And these Roman beads don't really carry that. As far as I can see, the way that they're collected, the way that they're gathered, is not quite the same as this sense of retro. I suppose ultimately I have to come back to that question of whether or not this is just a modern luxury. In the past, say, 200 years, 150 years, have we developed this ability to have, say, a Bakelite phone that doesn't work anymore in our living room, because we can also afford to have a phone that works in our living room? Is it a cultural luxury? I can't really imagine that people, say, in deep prehistory had this sense of retro. I can't really imagine that you would keep around a stone tool that really doesn't work in your environment, thousands of years old, maybe hundreds of years old, just because it is old. You might keep it because your great-great-great-great-great-grandfather killed a bear with it, possibly. You might keep it because you're interested. You just pick it up and go, ooh, that's quite cool. But you're not. It's not that sense of, oh, look how cute and retro this stone tool is. Oh, I need it. I simply have to have it. And okay, yes, I know I'm building in a certain amount of campness into that characterization, but I still think that this is a really hard thing to tie down. And ultimately, I suppose the question is, are there any examples out there? In China, for example, I don't know, the changing fashions in ceramic design. I suppose what I'm talking about is not the ability to change, but the ability, whether or not we can actually see or read about or tie down an instance where someone has gone, okay, this is the new design. It's nice, but I prefer that one. I'm going to keep the old one because the old one is I like it. The old one's retro, as opposed to wanting the new and latest thing. And I'm not sure, I can't really think of any examples of that, really. There's one more thing that does come to mind, and again, unfortunately, it's a Roman example, but that is where I think when Egypt and Rome were having more and more communication in the sort of the republic to empire kind of transition, having more and more interaction, more and more back and forth of especially Roman dignitaries, and they brought with them fashions which are outdated in Egypt to Rome. These were sort of caricatures of, say, Egyptian makeup styles or hairstyles, and Roman ladies would try and copy them. But that's not, again, I don't think that really qualifies as retro. That's more an outdated and stereotypical view of another culture coming into it. It's a little bit like the Egyptomania which came in, went across the world actually in the 20th century with Tutankhamun, bringing it into the architecture, say for example in places like Los Angeles or Brighton or whatever, and in that sense doing like a caricature of it. It's not the same as having that sense of retro, because it's alien actually. In many ways I think retro has to be something which is familiar to you, or culturally has a reference point for you. I don't know, I've rambled on a little bit about this because I'm trying just to log all my different thoughts, because I think it's an interesting question, but I really want to know if you guys can think of anything which highlights this tendency in the past, especially in the deep past. I mean, to be honest, I would take anything at this point. Beyond the 1700s back, I would take almost anything. Something which is not an heirloom, so it's not kept because it's a family heirloom, and it's not kept because it represents power or something like that. Something which is just kept because it is outdated. Did that happen in the Middle Ages, for example? Again, I can't think of any examples. So I'm going to leave this one with you guys. Again, Archaeo-Scope, that's the whole point of this video. Please do comment below, please do discuss this below. I want to know, is retro a modern thing? That's quite a pleasing sentence, isn't it? Is retro a modern thing? As ever guys, do keep the conversation civil, and wish me well at the dentist. I really hate the dentist. Until next time, do take care. Bye bye.